We are just starting the live stream and then we'll get started.
Great. Sounds wonderful.
We're just starting the live stream and then we'll get started.
Great. Sounds wonderful. Interesting.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sharika Garner, and I'll be the moderator for this session titled Choose Your Own Research Adventure, Exploring Vibe Coding, Decision Trees, and Information Literacy with Claude AI. Before we begin, we have a few reminders. We have a code of conduct that we will adhere to for this conference. The link is posted in the chat. If you experience any issues related to conduct, please contact us via email at galesconferencesupport@googlegroups.com. Please be sure your microphone is muted. During the Q&A, please wait until you are invited to unmute before asking your question or making your comment. And you may also use chat for questions. This session is being recorded and live streamed. You can enable captions by clicking on the Show Captions button at the bottom of the screen. So it is my pleasure to introduce Jason Cerrato. Jason Cerrato is a social sciences and STEM instructional librarian at Brown University, where he serves as a library liaison to a variety of academic departments, including applied math, chemistry, physics, and earth, environment, and planetary sciences, as well as sociology and the Master of Public Affairs program. Please join me in welcoming Jason.
Oh, please hold your applause, everyone. Um, Thank you so much for having me. Oh, I see. I do see the emotive applause. Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah, I'm Jason Cerrato. I'm a social sciences and STEM librarian at Brown University. I'm going to do my best to toggle between both cameras. We know that that's just kind of like the sort of schizophrenia of multiple cameras and inputs, all that. So thank you all for joining me today. I'm going to do a quick screen share. So the run of show, we will take a look at some slides. Feel free to put or save questions for the chat or at the end of the conversation. And then we'll segue into taking a look at some of these decision tree user interfaces I have generated using Claude AI, my preferred AI tool, an AI tool that we support at the enterprise level within the library at Brown. But as an institution writ large, we adopt and support Gemini Deep Research and Notebook LM. So this is kind of like a small scoped kind of pilot program. We're using this tool and seeing how we can leverage it to kind of make up some gaps in some traditional instructional spaces, endemic to the library. So here we go. And I am assuming everyone migrated over with me. I'm seeing that's a yes. Fantastic. Cool. Okay, everybody. So here we are. And let me just, again, move this camera so it's not so pervasively in my line of sight. Okay, so here we go. Quick introduction to the conversation. I'll just give you a quick sense of who I am, my background, some of the genesis or the conditions that gave rise to this project, and certainly some of the thought process from myself and my team of liaison librarians here at Brown who've really thought about the ways in which we could definitely leverage these tools without compromising some of our values, some of our core workflows, and some of our sort of sense of where the horizon is and the future is going in this world of information literacy. And that really kind of flows from consultations, what it is to work in a resource-rich environment, although I would say this equally could apply to a more constrained space. It certainly grew out of our need to develop asynchronous assets, the needs that were articulated by our communities. But really, it's all about the decision tree, and we'll make our way to that. And then I'll give you some practical advice if you're interested in working in your own context. So without further ado, I am Jason, and I will save you the very wide portfolio discussion. All I will say is I work at Brown. I assume a very sort of traditional liaison role in a variety of social science and STEM spaces. I'm a PhD candidate at Simmons University, the School of Library Science. Critical pedagogies is really sort of my jam as it might meet library instruction. I also teach at Simmons. Library instruction is one of my favorite classes to teach, and I do like to include primary source instruction, data discovery, a lot of different kinds of formatted resources. And before I was a librarian, I was a professor at CUNY, City University of New York, and I got my master's from the New School of Social Research. So shout out to the New School. So the genesis of the project, and here is Schrodinger's cat, and that really sort of what is always been a baseline conversation for us in the library is kind of thinking about the black box that is consultations. Now, I want to be very upfront that I know librarians can be a little bit cagey when it comes to sort of opening up or peeling back the curtain when it comes to this sort of beautiful, serendipitous, very spontaneous kind of engagements and interactions we have in consultation spaces. That being said, thinking about what the structure looks like, how we can best position our students to be successful once they leave those consultations, how to maybe mitigate or cut down on follow-ups, but also how to balance what it is to live in a very resource-rich environment, which Brown might be considered, but certainly how we can help students get more directly focused on their own research and maybe center the experience more on their needs specifically. It also has become manifestly clear excuse me, within the consultation space that we oftentimes have conversations about tools, about methods, about highly specialized work. So the sort of structure, the routine, the predictability, well, let's be very clear, like consultations are very bespoke, they are very student-centered, but they really do bring us oftentimes beyond the reference interview. So surfacing that in a way that could help us to report on the impact that we're making, both in our institutional spaces and with the communities we serve. Well, that's always been an interest of mine coming from an assessment background. And I guess the basic question is, I always ask myself is, what do our students or community members take away from these consultations? And I very much mean this in literal material terms. So what you see right next to us pictured, very grainy screenshots of the previous endeavors I used to engage in, which was providing every student I had a consultation with some kind of follow-up documentation. And you can kind of see the loose guidelines I would follow, really rehashing, reinforcing, and maybe exploding different research questions or the segments within them, finding keywords, connecting them to our local catalog, recommended databases, and then doing some tandem searching and some evaluation of records in real time. That's generally the flow of a lot of what my consultations look like. But certainly, again, we're always open to kind of the morbid spontaneity of them. That being said, you could see that there are some structural elements here that could be helpful to automate, to reproduce, or to effectively embed within a tool to push out to students, even if those consultation spaces take very unforeseen turns. So just knowing what was happening in consultations was at least one of the motivating factors for the work that I've been doing. Again, living and working in a resource-rich environment, Brown currently supports something like 830 databases. And while sometimes more is more, sometimes less is more. So that's a conversation here as well. How to balance the learning goals, getting students onboarded into our very, very complex information ecosystem and environment, how we then cultivate best practices for wayfinding, but how we also work our way towards a critical evaluation of resources. Again, most of us want to be in the conversation about the research by the end. So thinking about these steps within the process, there's a lot to balance. And of course, what you really want to do is make sure that you are getting students the resources and the information or materials that are most critical to the success of their projects or work, of which many are at the thesis or capstone level, just given the students that I work with on the day-to-day. And then I guess the question being is, how can we maybe automate this process? Or how can we introduce a little bit of like tool support to maybe expedite or streamline or drive efficiencies when it comes to working with students, reporting out, giving them this concierge documentation, this very bespoke, very contextualized document that connects to the research themselves. And of course, again, our sort of big picture motivations, expediting the prep. Also, when it comes to working with students, you see I have a very wide portfolio. There's really, a lot of strategic kind of decisions we have to make to get ready for these kinds of activities. And of course, summarizing consultation endeavors, that's always something I am critically concerned with, snapshotting that not just for the powers that be, understanding assessment or impact, but then certainly providing that to the students. And again, you can go great distances in a consultation, and the question becomes, is that internalized? And how is that carried forward in a meaningful way? Well, I always have those questions. So we started this process, or at least I did, across multiple institutional settings, trying to leverage like a Qualtrics form. Qualtrics is a fairly clunky interface in a way. It can do quite a bit if you're like a qualitative or quantitative researcher, if you're a librarian, just kind of looking to surface assessment characteristics or to push out a PDF with some embedded links, it's not the easiest system to use. I think most of us are probably wed to, the Google form environment when it comes to surveys or collecting feedback. But what I liked about the Qualtrics conversation was you could do a sort of if-then, a logic-based presentation. And my thinking is I wanted to load up all of our databases, and on the basis of those research questions, wanted to be able to click a couple buttons and automatically generate the most relevant research databases or assets from our catalog at a high level, of course, given where the student was. And of course, that kind of got us into the conversation about how we could kind of go further, move beyond Qualtrics, and maybe work within our native environments, i.e. something like SpringShare LibGuides. So, and then, of course, just kind of putting it out there in a big picture way, slide decks is really sort of our main kind of like our main thrust when it comes to instructional assets. They're reliable, familiar, easy to share. We love them. That being said, the student research process, where they start, where you find them, how you might support their forward movement, that looks very different. It's almost a one-to-one, highly bespoke sort of reality. I think most folks on this call probably know that. But of course, connecting the dots, generative AI makes it possible to prototype new instructional forms without becoming a full stack developer. And to be very clear, I'm not even fully sure what that might mean, but what I do know is I worked through many different versions of these assets. You can see a screenshot of version 38 from Claude. So at a certain point, maybe I did feel like I was becoming a full stack developer, but a lot of the beta testing proved to be critical for pushing forward a consistent series template that could be scalable to other pursuits. And that's maybe something we can end the conversation with. And the question would be, and again, just kind of thinking about what this would actually look like, this user interface, it would be a widget, and that's about as technical I'm going to get in this conversation. But by the same token, it's not what can an AI tool do to make a widget, but what instructional work is worth translating into these interactive forms? So a lot of my inputs and assets were based on instructional assets like PowerPoint slides. So something worth thinking about. And of course, as we could probably think about, there's been a growing, if not inconsistent, need for asynchronous assets, particularly in the post-pandemic period. This all kind of came out of a cohesive workshop series that liaison librarians here at Brown started to put together. We sort of framed it under basic research fundamentals. We really wanted to make sure that we were upskilling students early in their academic journey, such that when we were meeting them in years 3 or 4, we were connecting around methods, analytical features, different tools, softwares, evaluation criteria, whatever it might be. So that being said, our core audience was undergraduate researchers, as I like to say, novice researchers, looking for foundational skills. The delivery environment, as I said, asynchronous. We were thinking about plugging these things into Canvas. Always a difficulty with the LTI integration. More importantly, they were positioned to be plugged into LibGuides, which made things a little more, let's say, familiar to those who are just getting comfortable with new AI tools and what they could do. And of course, the original assets that I used, and here's just a couple of screenshots from them, and we took a highly structured, consistent approach, which the tool was able to extract, extrapolate, and reapply over time, which was really wonderful. But more importantly, we really wanted to make sure we were moving from, introductory ideas like organizing or planning a project, finding things. We use very plain, natural language with an eye towards the way it could be ingested into these tools. And of course, our goal was really just to make the research process more self-selecting, more navigable, more reflective, and certainly more student-centered. And that's a really big, important feature of Brown's kind of liberal learning curriculum and environment. We really put a lot on students and student networks to kind of find their way through to research significance, investment, impact, whatever it might be. So in that way, the kinds of resources that can support the student culture are of particular interest, particularly to us at the library. Because we have sort of a flat instructional, at least, approach. And then I will also just say, just a quick thing, the 4-part sequence of workshops, planning and framing, finding, evaluating, and organizing things. And we all took a different turn as liaison librarians, developing our own assets, PowerPoint slides. We all worked on a common set of student learning outcomes we developed within our instructional working group. So what we are really trying to do is draw a thread through this whole conversation and then see if we can translate and transform these experiences into more interactive, engaging, self-selecting environments using these AI tools. Pretty ambitious, and of course, it took 38 swings on the first time and, a lot more after that. So, decision tree generation. This is really kind of when we get into the conversation you're probably interested in seeing today. And this is just a one small sliver of the 59 pages of code that I have generated with Claude AI to produce these user interfaces. There are different issues around tokenization, certainly the credits that you have, the capacity you have to act within the tool based on a institutional subscription, whatever it might be. We can set those things aside right now for the moment, just to say, like, Claude really did take on the predominance of the coding and programming work. And I want to be very clear, I'm a librarian. I pridefully take on a lot of work, but when it comes to this world, you could consider me a charlatan in a way. I know enough HTML to verify. I know the tools to verify. I certainly know web accessibility standards, something I'll mention in a moment, because of course those have come into focus lately. But the reality is, I had a vision and the capacity to articulate that in natural plain language with a degree of structure, but I really wasn't sure what the tool would produce. What kind of user interface understanding it was both trained on, but the flexibility it could kind of produce those assets and documents in real time. So I will just keep it moving. Oh, good, we're doing okay on time. So Claude AI, that was my choice of tool. I will say that I did also test this with ChatGPT. The problem being is that ChatGPT is an internet embedded tool. It web scrapes. That's a lot of what the training data comes from. That being said, when you use ChatGPT, it likes to introduce a lot of things from just the wild, wild west of the internet. Claude is a more, let's say, confined, closed universe. And I was very explicit with the prompting I gave it to only work with the inputs or the assets I uploaded into it. And certainly with an eye towards very much preserving the language, the concepts, the values, but adding some of the more, let's say, aesthetic qualities based on university branding, but also just generally speaking, what a good, palatable, enjoyable user interface might look like. So a lot of prompt requirements put out there, and I was really interested what was going to come back. I'll say something about my approach to prompting also that kind of led me to a more effective way to engage with these tools. But of course, the more that you prompt and engage, the more it gets a sense of your own voice, your own needs, and maybe your own work or usage environment. So, there's something to be said about that. That being said, Claude, of course, if you're thinking about the division of labor here, Claude did all the coding, about 59 pages worth. I supplied the critical evaluation, right? An understanding of the purpose, the sort of esprit de corps amongst the library as to why we were doing this, our pedagogical focuses, the context by which students would be engaging with this, the constraints of both being early in your academic journey, but also the constraints of a very, let's say, particular kind of information environment. But by and large, my role by the back end of things was a quality assurance role, which I love, having worked previously with engineering students. So there was a nice kind of synergy there bringing me back home. What I will say is the tool accelerated prototyping, but this is really when you have to be kind of open to the iterative experience. Look, something we know quite well is we are very enmeshed in that world of taking swings, learning from those things, incorporating feedback, and going forward. I mean, that's sort of like the locus of searching in a way for a lot of librarians. That being said, the same logic applies, but really, really with an eye towards the minutia and how maybe changes deep to a tool, an interface might change the overall experience. Sometimes those are things you just have to learn the hard way, which I very much did. So the final products then were shaped by multiple attempts and certainly different sets of eyes evaluating them, different student groups testing them, with the vision towards this fall launching them and putting them live. And again, the most transferable skill here was not me learning code or being better at evaluating code, is kind of thinking about what instruction looked like, how it would look in an asynchronous environment, how a interface might, let's say, complement that or constrain and restrict what that experience might be. And I guess the big takeaway is, librarians, We probably have some sense of coding, but what we certainly can do is evaluate a user experience interface for basic functions, basic delivery options, and certainly pain points or frustrations. And again, my view was let's lean into who we are and what we've got, which is, robust, savvy user experience testing for some of us, unless, let's say, the programmatic technical side of developing these assets. Whew, okay. So, the prompts, they started as pretty quick, pretty dirty, with pretty succinct goals. They always included certain learning outcomes. I was very explicit about being referential to only uploaded or ingested assets or documents that I provided. I prompted early on very minimalist kind of cues around the user interface. Part of what I wanted to see was like how much competency the tool had to approximate my needs based on the structure about the assets and the very thin prompts I was giving it. And the most important thing I always put at the end, beyond like a style kit for your university hex code, colors, etc., would be something like preserve all language within uploaded or ingested assets. Because of course we can see the ways in which these tools can flatten language. And if you're a Claude user, you know that M dashes, it loves M dashes. And I love M dashes too, but not as much as Claude does. So again, kind of thinking about what that means. My expectation was a lot of iteration, a lot of tweaking, a lot of turning, but certainly like keeping an open mind. And again, just getting really used to kind of moving through this experience, but also adopting the mindset of an introductory undergraduate student, which I think is kind of helpful to envision those sort of mindsets or perspectives sometimes. So first few passes, just to give you kind of a sense of things. The initial outputs, they were full page HTML documentation with like a global CSS style kit added to that. That created so many problems, so many headaches, particularly working in the SpringShare environments. We are not allowed to change our CSS styling here at Brown, but the embedded code with the CSS style kit would do that, which would change then like the relative size, the text, and just basically the workability of the interface. So that was a lot. And again, I had to really think sort of carefully about how to word changes to the tool without changing the overall interface it was existing or living in, i.e. SpringShare LibGuides. So the result over time came to be like a very scoped widget that was then patterned and provided the foundation for all 4 sequences going forward. And again, just some of the prompt snippets that I provide you on the right. And again, I'm always interested to hear the way people engage with prompts themselves. Keeping it moving. And so just to give you like a sense of things, because we'll jump over into them and take a look at them in a second. But the final product, we had 4 self-contained widget wrappers. Each had their own unique IDs for embedding. I had a pre-canned like a macro style kit based on our hex number, university colors, some contrast best practices. It's an easy thing to prefabricate and just plug into the end of any prompt if you're producing an asset. These tools can be wonderful when you allow them to lean into the aesthetics, but if you don't guide them, it just gets a little wacky and it gets a little weird. And we like weird, but we also like consistency, usability, and transparency. So just something to think about, right? The tab navigation, I was very, very explicit about the way in which I wanted users to move through this. I wanted a global across the top navigation, which conforms to best experiences or practices for user movements through tools. I wanted a phase tracker at the bottom. I wanted the consistent structure that we adopted within the workshop physical series themselves. They were all 3 modules. They started with an opening activity, closing activity, and some sort of like some limited activities within, which I had then flipped into students filling out a downloadable form they could take with them after using this. And again, I just wanted to mirror that workshop structure. And explicit asks that I had based on what I started to kind of creatively game out in terms of how people might interact with this. I wanted accordions, pull apart, checklists. I wanted drop downs. I wanted knowledge check areas. I wanted text areas areas preserved, but I did want some very clear distinguishing factors within that text, color, highlight, contrast, etc. I did want the phase tracking, the progress indicator, and at the end, I wanted students to be able to download an asset with a usable file format, a TXT file. So I will show you that, I think, in just a moment. Yeah, it's time. I'm like definitely moving in time today. That's great. Doesn't happen often. You could probably see that. So a couple caveats before I jump into this. So I'm sure, like me, those web accessibility standards really kind of crept up on us this past spring. That being said, there was some impact on the ways in which I had to kind of pull out some of our proxy links based on that work. They will be backfilled and then populated in sort of like in a prelude to sort of more robustly piloting them this fall. Without further ado, I saw a couple hand raised. We feeling okay? I'm gonna just switch and I'm gonna hope that you're gonna follow me along. And it looks like you have. All right, lovely. Okay. So this is the preview mode, obviously, in SpringShare. I unpublished these, removed the proxy links because of those web accessibility updates this past spring. But again, we're slowly working back through and just double checking that all of this complies with some of those new standards, which again, would really, really kind of bring down the whole house of cards if they did not. So that being said, what you're seeing is basically the conversion of all of those in-person workshops to 4 digestible, easy-to-use user interfaces with an accompanying promotional video that we intend to then push out to different community members such that we can drive some more of this asynchronous engagement. I'll talk about the video at the end because I certainly took all of these assets, uploaded them back into Claude and said, create the script of a 2-minute promotional video and get all the highlights. And that was not a bad way to move forward in that. So let me just kind of walk through some of these things because it's pretty cool. I always say, though, please don't be too seduced by some of this work because, again, there's always going to be problems, kinks, and certainly better ways of doing this. But by the same token, thinking about, again, some of those initial precursors, how we open up consultations, how we provide students as they literally leave those consultations, how we cut down on follow-ups, how we manage extensively resource-rich environments, and how we drive self-selecting, self-identifying, self-motivated students doing their own research, while all that kind of collapses into the asynchronous resource environment. So I'm just gonna kind of walk through these things really quickly, and maybe I can just make this a little bit bigger just in the interest so that we could kind of see more. So here is the first. I will also say that just to fit this all on the same screen, I shrunk some of the text. I'm always very explicit about text size, about headers, because Claude understands most web accessibility and usability guidelines. They're pretty good to map to that, but it's always good to just be very clear about, Arial font, 12-point text, moving different headers for larger sections, etc. So here we go. And, again, all of this text is based on the text from those slides. So we had just the development of this user interface. So we welcome everybody and we have buttons. I had to make sure all the buttons work. Here are some of these student learning outcomes. I've tried so often to get rid of all of the emojis, but Claude really loves emojis. So sometimes you just have to let Claude do Claude, and that's just kind of what it is. So let's begin the workshop just so you can see. So opening activity, and here we have just a couple of questions. You can check them off as you move through. Here we have and I'm just going to do test for all of these so that you see them. You can save that, draft save, wonderful, great. So we've answered some initial questions. We've thought about our research topic. We've thought about scope, about scale, about problem statements, about really actionability of research, why it might be significant to us, how we might use different methodologies, all questions student might come to us to turn over and talk about, but certainly could explore in these asynchronous spaces. So if we go to module 2, we now move to explicit reference materials. And again, this will be an introduction to common reference materials. We no longer have reference desks at Brown, so this might be a good way to kind of close that labor gap as well. Most of our excess services folks take on circulation conversations, citational stuff if they're doing ready reference, but most of the traditional reference world is still filled by us, but we're confident that maybe there are folks slipping through the cracks, especially in STEM fields. Where the textbook seems to still very much like rule the day in a lot of ways, right? So moving down, we have some key insights into thinking about where you are, what you don't know, sort of common way to approach research questions. Then we have some drop downs that students can move through. Now, this is one of those moments where I had to strip out all of the proxied links. So we had examples of handbooks in our catalog that we could then click on, encyclopedias, subject dictionaries, or thesauri for different databases. And of course, we doubled down for some very specific things. These buttons don't work because, again, I shut them down for the web accessibility. But you can see the ways in which students can now explore our catalog in a more sort of scope-constrained, kind of usable way. So let's just do a little more of this, test, whatever. Then we have a knowledge check. Great, fantastic. These are a little bit quirky, but we kind of wanted to make people laugh at the end. So we go to module 2. And again, just kind of thinking about what project planning might be. That's the big thrust of this first workshop. So, you can click on different sections. You can get a sense of what you might need. Oftentimes, a lot of our students in thesis or even like methods classes are getting things like IRB approval to do classroom projects, very much similar to the way graduate students might be doing that. So again, even kind of thinking about building in, elements of just basic project planning, working backwards from like deadlines and things like this, definitely an important thing. So we'll go there, and then we'll go module 3. And then, of course, like, again, thinking about like what it would be connecting students with us. A big sort of goal by the end of this first session is students just know our name, our face, our contact info, what we can and can't do, how we can connect with them, and certainly some of these services that we have on offer. And these buttons all brought us to different LibGuides specifically, which is a really great way to move beyond just the material environment, but some of the assets we have produced, which are largely textual, but still evergreen. So that's all fantastic. And then, of course, we ask people to identify who their subject liaison is, right? So I'm just going to put myself because I do that. So fantastic. So let's do like a wrap up really quickly. And then, of course, we get like some just final thoughts, thinking about next steps, moving us into the next phase. And we just do a test like this. And let's do download notes. Oh, and this is like chef's kiss, people. I'm kind of like, no notes. Literally, oh, and look at this. Yeah, that TXT file pops up, and that is everything. And now that is actually a great way to take away from this activity something tangible, which again, in this resource-rich environment is like such a critical thing. I mean, it's even critical for me. Sometimes we have these super niche, super specific, maybe like 5 user databases, but that database is critical for that research field, right? It's an easier way to just keep track of a very complex information ecosystem. So let me see. 134, cool. Let me just show you another one really quickly. My favorite one is like organizing things because I'm just like a Zotero junkie. Hold on, let's just do, there we go. Fantastic. And I will just go right to the end in a moment just so you can kind of see the ways in which some of this tool can be leveraged. One thing I will say, though, is sometimes, like, again, like I did not put this in. So sometimes it does add, based on what you've said, its own approximated language. So just kind of be clear about all that. This is literally like the agenda from, again, from like one of the slide decks. So again, just kind of seeing the way it one-to-one puts these within a user interface. So we begin the workshop. We can see that this one has some, I would call like gamified elements. So this is a little bit of like meta reflection right here. Da, da, da. This is all very nice. Note-taking, meta-reflective, all really cool. Thinking about process. Again, all of these things would connect to LibGuides previously. Other tools we would connect to. Of course, we don't support Mendeley either anymore, so that's just another thing to think about, just being very clear about what you're putting into these things. Great, more, test, whatever. Fantastic. Look, it snuck in an emoji right there. I wasn't paying attention. You're such a bum sometimes, Claude. Okay, and then now this was mine. This again was not mine. So it seemed to be like identifying the generated textual content with a sort of green highlighted space. So that was interesting. But more importantly, and again, these would be drop downs with links if we can get around some of those proxy standards. Then again, some really great stuff. And this is just like, generic stuff that we pulled out from our sort of canned structural materials around citation, the value of annotation. I personally love an annotated bibliography. It's something commonly our first and second year students are doing in lieu of or in lead up to a lit review. So this is always really great, really lovely. I'm just going to keep it going right to the end. Da, 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 da. Yeah, and this is all wonderful, cool stuff, right? Thinking about like what indicators of progress might be, super cool. This is what I loved. And I actually communicated this. This was probably something I was the most specific about, and I was so pleased that Claude was really able to translate exactly what I asked for. And that was really just an incredible thing. It looks a little bit clunky at the moment just because of a few backend updates. But something like gap analysis. Now, this can be very abstract for students, right? We almost sort of say this in the assumption of, gap analysis. This is where you surface the sexy, like unheard of, unforeseen, or certainly like emerging research questions. It's where you find erased voices, marginalized experiences. This all sounds great, but it seems very abstract, particularly for people who also are thinking about just the global evaluation of information process. So what I really liked is let's sort of scope this by traditional categories: history, theory, argumentation, and then counterpoints to those things, counterfactuals, right? We can add lists of sources right here, but then we can give it like a coverage rating. So when we look at this at the end, we can say, look, like we've got a lot of historical materials that run, like later 19th century, early 20th century. We have a lot of really great theoretical frameworks. Some of them could be juiced up a little bit. We could adopt a few more that maybe connect more to our conversation. But it's really like main arguments that we pull out of our like evidence matrix, right? Or the counter arguments that help us to think critically or conceptually about the world in which we're engaging. Yeah, I mean, I just have found this to be like a more palatable, digestible, easier onboard for this gap analysis conversation. And then, of course, we just, test, right? Blah, 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 blah. Oops, sorry, continue to wrap up. And yeah, and then session recap. Again, always good to have those things. One final reflection. And again, this is one of those things where, we always ask students to kind of think about like, what is your process? We really want to be metacognitive about it, or at least thinking through what the experience is. And then some action items, download my notes, same thing, or review the workshop, start over, and everything has a button that reinitiates the beginning. So those are our user interfaces, and they are pretty cool. Again, like, the finding things one looks a little bit different, and you can kind of see, again, your sort of basic Boolean conversation, right? And this just looks, I think, a little more visually presentable than just our sort of flat textual LibGuide assets. So if I can jump back over to this to kind of think about like, best practices or just kind of the evaluation of my own process, things I've learned, all of the just horrible failures I have had, which of course you have to be really willing to, not just get too frustrated with these things, right? I mean, like they're so seductive, they work so quickly, they do amazing things, but when they don't do what you want them to do, it's a struggle to kind of get them to move in that direction, or at least conceptually, right? So onwards and upwards, yeah, that's that cool drop down I showed you. You can see how much I love it. I love it more than any of my colleagues, so that's probably why I'm here talking about it. So what worked and what did not? Yeah, so again, like it rapid fire, it just like shot out those first drafts of HTML with like minimalist CSS additions, some JavaScript interfaces, which drive some of those sort of like functionality drop down, some of those different kind of user interface inputs, I'm told. Consistent reuse of an established design across later modules. Again, the structure that we had already developed within the assets and the workshop series in person was just a helpful anchor point for Claude to understand the structure that we wanted to reproduce and how to reproduce it at scale consistently. The slide decks really did work very well, and I hope that there's a lot of you on this call that have opened up Claude and have started throwing in your slide decks and seeing what kind of interfaces it could make. I got to tell you, like, we do a lot of like a critical primary source research here at Brown, and we do like a lot of critical motivated, like I would call primary source literacy. So thinking about what like a critical specific interface or deck might look like as it relates to the student experience. I mean, wow, just the sky's the limit there. Donna Haraway is happy somewhere, I promise you. Fast interface revisions when requested change was specific. And again, this was just kind of thinking about what worked, what didn't, what I needed, but also how to kind of cut down on the noise. These tools do want to embellish and add to that. So again, scoping them to just your very specific articulated needs, very important. So at first, the outputs, they just kind of ignored like the reality of the system I was working in, which caused some of those global CSS breakdowns, which were just super annoying. When kind of working over time piecemeal, something about Claude and all of these tools is they kind of lose the thread on longer conversations. So when it came to working over a few days or weeks on a particular asset, a user experience interface asset, there was difficulty recovering the work that had been done. But of course, I am also told that these tools do an exceptional job at not forgetting who you are. So there is some kind of, there's some shadiness happening there. But again, these are corporate tools. These are consumer tools. I would not expect anything different. And that's just kind of the reality, right? Accessibility, maintainability, or what it is to just provide basic maintenance and just basic operational consistency to these things. It always requires human review. Something you probably noticed here at Brown is we don't have really great color contrast design choices for our institutional branding. So just kind of thinking about what would work best and what wouldn't. And of course, that's a lot of just testing, and then a lot of testing with wave tools, and a lot of testing with color contrast checkers, right? Something we, again, all know from both LibGuide, new web standard additions, but just generally speaking, our engagement with the world of information. And then of course, AI can make a working interface, before it makes a pedagogically responsible one. And this is something I really kind of want to put out there. Like, it loves the idea of razzle dazzle, but didn't really understand the way in which I wanted an undergraduate student to be able to click on buttons, connect to our catalog, go back to the asynchronous asset, move back to their research. Again, research is a non-linear process, and again, this tool really wanted to drive people in a unidirectional way right through, as though they were, going from 0 to 60 by the end, starting the research project, and that's usually just, not the case that I've encountered. Practical advice for librarians, and here's just a picture of some of the issues, screenshot, like when the CSS global kind of navigation was just messed up. It just was real messy, not really great at all. Again, I always like to say this, think about like where students are experiencing the breakdowns of the research process. So for us, because we are such a materially rich environment, if students are not starting at Bruno or our local catalog and working through that, they're basically just doing Google Scholar searching or open internet searching, or even now, Chat GPT or Perplexity searching to develop case studies. So, the reality is like we were thinking, we want more student exposure. So we really wanted to think about what these tools could do to drive that sense of exploration. So again, the kind of less is more, but that's why the buttons and the pop-ups into the catalog were so important, which will be a continuing conversation going on. This is for all my engineering friends, having had worked in that space. Write prompts like design briefs, highly structured, bullet pointed, talk about things like your audience, the platform you're going to use. If it's a platform the tool's not familiar with, download materials that talk about that environment and ingest those as well, because you will be training the tool to understand the information technical ecosystem, right? The kind of goals you wanted of this. So again, I was like, I don't want you to generate text for me. I want you to generate the interface. I want you to preserve the text. And even that can still be a little bit of a dicey proposition. Tone, very important. And I just say basically like adopt a structure and be consistent, see what works for you. But I also tend to think that we shouldn't spend too much time prompting. just by virtue of what it is to what it is to want to work with the assets, the outputs, and maybe not like the sort of inputs that drive those sort of things, not to diminish the value of those things at all. And uh, and hold on, let me see if there's a couple of things I do want to address some of the questions. Oh, and here's like my last slide right here. So just letting people know, again, like, Gen AI can help you prototype some assets, whether or not you will use them, deploy them. And again, we've not made a firm decision around how we might actually want to deploy them, how they might be leveraged, how we could scale them to consultation experiences, but also then think about them in advanced research spaces. I played with developing lit review user interfaces, which is been a lot. It's been a very interesting experience. And again, just kind of seeing where that labor shifts. It's not as though like I did not invest significant amount of time and the time wasn't even just tweaking the interface itself. It was genuinely thinking like what I wanted this to be, how I wanted the experience to look, using other tools, taking notes, identifying pain points, etc. And again, what I really liked about this from the developer side as librarian is these information literacy values, transparency, context, evaluation, keeping a human in the loop. It all is still very much present when you're using these tools, and certainly something we like to communicate to our students. So there was a nice kind of meta double narrative there. And again, I think the best outcome is just not something flashy, but something usable and something that is really connected to the usability environment. And again, my general attitude towards AI, I'm neither a futurist or an inherent skeptic. I always just say, I'm going to keep an open mind. And that's about as much as I know, because, where the danger is, sometimes that's where the saving power grows. So thank you all very much for letting me speed run through those slides. Yeah, thank you all. No, please don't hold your applause. It really fills me up. It does affirm me. But anyways, thank you all very much. And yeah, we have some time for some questions, I think.
We are unfortunately out of time, but are
Wrong.
people welcome to are people welcome to email you with the
Yes,
questions that they have?
please do. And these slides are available to download in the broader environment here for the conference. So thank you all for coming. It was wonderful to see you all. Yeah, I told you I have a problem of going a little bit long. That's me.
You did great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And we
Awesome.
hope everyone else enjoys the rest of their conference day. Be sure to email Jason with any questions you have. Thanks, everyone.